This is Regin's Travels podcast. Welcome to another episode of Regin's Travels podcast. This is Regin Reyno, and joining us today is Michael Puldy, a member of the Board of Governors of the Circumnavigators Club, one of the most exclusive travel clubs in the world. He is a photographer, an author, and CEO of his own company. He's been to all 50 United States and close to 50 countries. His most notable books are The Millennial's Guide to Business Travel, which was published in 2016, and his most recent one, Himalaya Memories, published in 2021. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Regin. Thanks a lot for having me.
How are you doing there right now?
I'm doing fine. As you can guess, it's the evening here in Los Angeles, and I know it's the morning where you are in the Philippines. So I think it's always exciting, actually, when I can have a international type of conversation with someone on the other side of the planet. I miss those days. I miss traveling to Asia.
When was the last time you traveled abroad? Before
last week.
Oh, okay. So you can start traveling now there in the US?
Yeah. It's not every country. As you can expect, there's a lot of restrictions, so you have to pick and choose. And I had an opportunity to go to Germany last week mostly for some car experiences, which I know we'll talk about later today. But anyway, so I had an opportunity to go to Germany for a meeting, and then I took a few days to drive around on the Autobahn and go see some really very different, cool museums and fun things in that part of the world. But before that, it probably had been a couple of years since I had left the United States.
Oh, I think that's really amazing, especially traveling on the Autobahn and driving a German car. You were driving a Porsche, right?
Well, actually, on the Autobahn, I had two experiences. I was driving a Porsche Taycan, which is their all-electric Porsche, and
wow.
we had that on the Autobahn, and we were driving around 200 kilometers per hour on that. And then we rented a car. We had an Audi A7 sedan, which is a quattro all-wheel drive sedan, and we were driving a lot faster in that car. I think we were up to like 240, 250 kilometers per hour, which is like 140 miles an hour. It was pretty fast.
Oh, this sounds really amazing. I would love to experience that one day as well. I've been there, but not driving. I was a passenger when I had my experience of the German highway, the Autobahn, and it's really amazing. So someday, hopefully, I can drive there as well. I think that's an amazing experience. And you've traveled a lot. You've been to 50 United States, close to 50 countries. And currently, you're one of the members of the board of governors of the Circumnavigators Club. You've been all over. You've been to Asia. You've been to 6 continents. Wow, what an amazing travel accomplishment! So, how did this all start? Your passion for travel?
Well, I think, when when you asked me that earlier as we were prepping for our show, I really had to dig deep to figure out really where did that start from, because I'm an old guy now. I'm actually approaching 60. Hard to believe. But when I was a kid, I grew up in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida, which is the northeast part of the state. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the United States, Florida is in the southeast corner. It's a peninsula surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. And pretty much until I was 18, I never left the state of Florida. I got to travel around the state. My grandparents, they would pretty much on my mother's side of the family, they traveled all over the world, and they were constantly coming back, bringing me little tchotchkes, little things like dolls or camels or hats from wherever they were in parts of the world, and I was always fascinated by these little things that they would bring back, because if we remember back in the 60s and 70s, you couldn't go to Walmart or Target and pretty much get something from any place in the world. So these gifts that were being brought back to me, really, you really could only get them in those parts of the world. And then independently, my father also traveled a lot for business, and he spent a lot of time, a little bit in Europe, but mostly in Asia. He spent a lot of time in Hong Kong and a lot of time in China and Japan, and that's again back in the time when you could go to those countries and you can purchase purchase things like watches and cameras for a lot less than you can get them in the United States. And so I think between those two items, that kind of germinated my passion to go out and kind of see what was out there outside of Florida. And then when I went to college in South Carolina. I within the first couple of months, I went with a bunch of friends on a road trip to Chicago, and then a few months later, I'm in New York City. And pretty much from that point on, I was pretty hooked that there was a cool, awesome world out there, and I wanted to see it all.
So, what was your first country outside of the US?
Actually, my first country outside the United States was Israel. I went with some friends of mine. Were going to Israel to go live on a kibbutz, which is a collective work settlement,
Right.
and uh, and so we were going to go do that, and then go travel backpack across Europe. And so what we did is we went to Israel. We started on a kibbutz in the Golan Heights, and which is right where the 67 border from the war of 1967 was. I mean, we were literally right there, right on the border. And within 5 days of arriving, the I believe it was called the Lebanon War of 1982, that started. And so we're watching F-16s fly over. We're seeing Katusha rockets explode about 2 kilometers in a valley from where I was in the kibbutz. I spent a night in a foxhole. I spent a couple of nights in a bomb shelter, and then once the Israeli army kind of pushed the Palestinians back into Lebanon, we left, and I met some friends in Tel Aviv, and then we got on a bus and we went to Egypt and saw the pyramids, saw the Valley of the Kings. We had some very exciting adventures on that trip. I mean, I actually traveled there by myself, and ended up meeting them in Cairo. And again, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phone. I had a handwritten map on a journal to the hotel that I was going to meet these people with, and so it's a miracle that I even found them and made it out alive. But like I said, it turned into a great story. And then from there, went back to Israel, traveled around the country, and then went to Greece, and then worked my way through the Western Europe and into the UK and Scotland. So very quickly, I picked up about 10 countries.
Wow, that's really amazing, especially pre-internet. I can imagine the experience, is quite difficult, I can imagine, but at the same time you can savor more the moment because you're not distracted. Because I remember my last travel without a smartphone was in 2011. I went to Cambodia, and during the time I didn't have a smartphone yet, and smartphones during the time were not very common. I was based in Thailand. So looking back, I'm reflecting once in a while and looking back at the travel. It's like, for me, it's a lot memorable just because I was able to really savor the place, the experience, because I didn't have a smartphone. Whenever I wanted to check the internet, I would go to an internet cafe. I remember that time when you have to go to an internet cafe to check emails. So that was the only time I had access to the internet. But most of the time, I was interacting with the locals and just immersing in the place because of the lack of this technology. I think that's one of the things that we are missing right now, like the real experience without these smartphones. But I'm wondering though, because you've mentioned that you first traveled internationally outside of the US when you were 18. And I'm thinking that that's quite late, especially comparing it to other countries like European countries or Australia, for example, where most of them get to travel after graduating. high school, for example. They have a gap year in the UK and in the US. Why do you think travel is not that popular in the US compared to other developed countries like in Europe or in Australia?
Well, it was actually even worse than you described. So when I was 18, that's actually when I left the state of Florida. I did not travel internationally until I was, I think, 19 or 20. So it was even worse than you described. Now, I think, well, let me just back up. So back in my era, I think it just was so foreign international travel was just such a foreign idea, meaning it was expensive. The United States is so distant from both Asia and Europe that international travel was going to Canada or going to Mexico. Maybe you went to Bermuda or the Cayman Islands or the Caribbean. I mean, that's as exciting as really international travel got, unless you were much older. And there was this stereotype in the United States that you really waited until you retired before you did any international travel. Today, it's actually in the United States, I believe, a lot more common to see young people going overseas with their families in their teens or preteens, or even taking a gap year. So, for example, I have two nephews and a niece, and all three of them took a gap year between their graduating high school and their first year in college and spent it overseas. My children, they all went somewhere internationally. I believe we went to Mexico, we've been to Canada, we went to Latin America. They traveled to probably 30 states in the United States before they went to college. And then all three of them went somewhere internationally during their college years as well. So, in fact, right now, my youngest son, who's 27, he's in Greece. He thinks, him and his wife, they think nothing of getting on a plane and going somewhere. In fact, I think they spent the summer during their college years. They spent it in Thailand.
Yeah, I think it's changing nowadays in terms of travel because I remember back then, even here in the Philippines, because I thought it was just here in the Philippines, just because, we're still a developing country. I didn't know that even in the US before, travel is not very common because I remember back then here in the Philippines, when you say international travel, most of the people who travel internationally are just those who are doing business or for
Mm.
work. It's very uncommon to hear people traveling for vacation to abroad. Usually we just do domestic travels here before, and for international vacations, the common destinations here are Singapore, Hong Kong, or the US. It's so unheard of before, like when you hear someone now saying I'm gonna go to Cambodia or to Vietnam for a vacation. Back then it's like that's so unheard of. So I guess it's really changing, and I didn't realize that even in the US it was the same. Like it was not very popular back then.
I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think it's cost. It's a lot less expensive to travel internationally than it used to. I mean, for me to go internationally 20 years ago, it was like $1,000 to go anywhere. Now it's not unheard of to find really, really inexpensive tickets for only a few $100s to go to South America, or you go to Iceland for $399. I mean, this is like crazy, crazy prices. So I think one is just the cost of travel is going down, and there's a lot more options to travel too. I mean, a lot more airlines, a lot more competitive structure, which of course is driving the price down. I think the second thing is much more important is the scared factor, the fear factor of going overseas. Oh, I don't know the language, I don't know where I'm going to stay, I don't know, a lot of I don't know. Well, now, there's not only so many guidebooks, but really, I mean, who gets a guidebook anymore? It's websites. It's websites, it's Instagram, it's Twitter, it's Facebook. You pretty much can go anywhere you want and find a great place to stay that fits your budget. You can meet people, pick someone that you like and start talking to them, and chances are good they're friendly and they're going to talk back. And then next thing you know, you have 3 places to go and people that you know in the country. And obviously you want to be careful because there's safety issues you want to be concerned about, but more times than not, it's easy to meet people that you feel comfortable with and makes you feel comfortable about traveling to another country.
Right. So I think the internet really changed things, especially regarding the travel scene. And if you look at photos of your friends, for example, on Instagram or on Facebook, you'd realize that, oh, he was able to do that. Maybe I can do it as well. That's actually
Yes.
doable. Going to, for example, going to Vietnam, it's not, oh, apparently it's not dangerous because he was able to do it. So it's doable. I can do it as well. So yeah, I think the internet played a huge role regarding the making
That's
travel very common.
exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, I know I personally, even though I've been to many places around the world, that I never knew anyone before I went there. On the flip side, there's also been a number of countries that I've been to where I've been very fortunate enough, either from business or personal relationships, to go to locations where I know someone. And it makes the visit, that much more delightful. I mean, one time I went to Hong Kong and it was like I emailed, it wasn't even a friend of mine. It was like a friend of a friend, kind of like, hey, I'm going to Hong Kong. Do you know someone? It's like, yeah, contact my friend, Eric, and Eric you know, will help you. So I reach out to Eric, and Eric says, oh, it'll be great to see you. Meet me for lunch in Central near the Star Ferry. And I'm thinking, okay, great. We'll go have, tea or lunch. Well, Eric spends the whole day with me, and he takes me to wet markets, and he takes me to the Great Buddha on Lantau Island. And, and I'm just like floored that this person who was probably 10, 15 years older than me would drop his entire day on a weekend to hang out with me to play tour guide. It was awesome though. It was great. I could never have planned that type of visit.
And Hong Kong is one of your favorite destinations, right?
Oh, I love Hong Kong. Actually, I love pretty much most of Asia. I have an affinity for that part of the world, and I couldn't tell you why I do, but I just really thoroughly have enjoyed every time I've been able to visit there, and the people that I meet are so kind and friendly, and the food is awesome. And of course, because of the way the geography is, the proximity to other countries is very close too. So, for example, I lived in Singapore for a couple of years as an expatriate, and I was very fortunate. I visited roughly, I think, 15, 16 countries while I was there, and saw things that had been on my list of places I've wanted to see for decades. And because I was living there and had a geographic location of very close proximity, 4 hours to India, 7, 8 hours to Sydney, 7, 8 hours to New Zealand, 7 hours to Japan, 3 hours to Hong Kong, and all within 1 or 2, 3 time zone differences. It's just, you can't beat it.
And you've circumnavigated the world. You're one of the members of the board of governors of one of the most exclusive travel clubs in the world, the Circumnavigators Club. I think that's really amazing. And probably you're even one of those who approved my application for the
Well, I'm happy.
circum.
I'm happy that you are also a member of the Circumnavigators, because there's many of us out there who have this shared love of travel, who have circumnavigated the globe, and it's a limited number of people who have done this. And that's what really, one of the really fun elements of this club, is it really brings together these people from all over the world, like yourself, who have completed a circumnavigation. And today, we should explain what that means, to circumnavigate the world. It's not like Magellan in the 1500s, where you're getting on a boat and you're headed west, and you're hoping that the world is not flat.
Right. So how did you do your first circumnavigation, or how many times did you circumnavigate the world? Did you do it a lot of
Well,
times already?
officially, yeah. Well, officially, I've only done it one time,
Okay.
but I've done a lot of partial circumnavigations, but officially one time. And for the Circumnavigators Club, the way it works is if you can demonstrate that you have gone around the world starting and ending in the same point, going in the same direction, so east to east, west to west, and you don't even have to do it in one trip, you can do it in multiple trips. So my circumnavigation, I lived in Boulder, Colorado. My airport was Denver, and so I flew from Denver to Dulles Airport in Washington D.C. to Frankfurt Airport, and I'd actually made that trip many, many times. I had people that worked for me outside of Frankfurt, so I was constantly traveling there. I'd been to Vienna a number of times. The way to get to Vienna is you have to fly through Frankfurt to get there. But anyway, so that was like, flying from Denver east to Frankfurt. And then while I was living in Singapore, I had to go to Bratislava, Slovakia. And for those who don't know, to get to Bratislava, you're flying through Frankfurt Airport. And so what I did is that was my return. So when I is starting it from Frankfurt, flew back to Singapore, then to Tokyo, and then to Denver. So I can
Wow.
draw I could draw a path from Denver to Dulles to Frankfurt to Singapore to Tokyo
Tokyo.
to Denver.
Oh, yeah, great, great. Yeah. So being a member of this club, what are some of the highlights or your favorite moments, memorable moments?
Well, the club is a very interesting club because especially in the pandemic. So you're not exactly going to a lot of meetings anymore. So the Circumnavigators Club is really, because the membership is really spread all over the world. There's a number of areas where there's concentrations, like New York City is a big concentration. Singapore is a concentration. London is a concentration. Naples, Florida, for example. Those are groups that have regular meetings. I'm affiliated with the Pacific Southwest United States, which their meetings are held in La Jolla, which is outside of San Diego. So for me, that's like a 2-hour drive to get there, and so I'm not going to every meeting for various reasons. So the Circumnavigator Club, the way the value that it brings to me is a couple of things. One, there's a great magazine called The Log, which I really love. There's some really great articles in that, and it introduces you to a lot of great people. There's a number of Zoom broadcasts which you can join, where again you meet some very interesting people. But the best part for me is when I'm in some of these cities where I can go to our directory and I can look up, okay, I'm visiting this city and I've got some time. Is there a circumnavigator or a club there that I can call and meet some people? And I've done that on a couple of occasions. And one time I was actually in New York City, and coincidentally they had a meeting there. And so I went to this meeting. It was more of a cocktail party. And I went to the cocktail party, and again, I met the most interesting, amazing people who had all traveled all over the world, of course. My 50 countries, it didn't even compare. It's like 50 countries just kind of got you to the poker table. You needed it to be impressive. You had to do over 100 countries. And some of the people that are part of this club, there are people that have traveled to 200 countries. In fact, the person I forgot the gentleman's name, the person that has the fattest passport in the Guinness Book of World Records, he's a member of this club. And then there's the gentleman who's traveled to the most countries in the world. And there's several people who have traveled to every country in the world. And even you and I know this, but a lot of people listening probably don't, but because of various geopolitical activities that are going on, countries kind of come and go on a regular basis. And so there's always a new country popping up or a country disappearing. And so to keep their standards of being able to say they've been to every country in the world they keep traveling. But my favorite story is I met this woman, and she's much older. I think she was probably in her 80s, maybe even early 90s when I met her. And we're telling stories about, oh, I was in this city and I was in an elevator and the door opens and there's my first cousin. Or so we're talking about these moments where you're just meeting someone completely out of context and completely unexpected. So we all tell our stories, and then she tells her story. So this is her story. In the late 40s, after World War II, she's living in California, and she's dating her. And I'm going to get the countries wrong, but just we'll use it for the purposes of storytelling. And she's with her Greek boyfriend, and they're driving up the coast of Malibu trying to find a restaurant, and they stop into a restaurant that they just kind of randomly picked, and they walked in, and this guy who was bussing tables was his friend from Italy, and they fought together in the resistance during World War II. And they hadn't seen each other since 1942 because they both went off to their separate missions, and they both thought the other one was killed.
Oh, man.
So she's there on this date with her Greek boyfriend, and she's there witnessing this reunion between these two partisan resistant fighters from World War II who were just so overjoyed that they're both seeing their friends after 5-7 years, and both of them were alive. I mean, just imagine the serendipity in that experience.
That's crazy. This an awesome story. Wow. Yeah, these things happen, man. Like, you don't really expect it, but when you travel, a lot of things can happen.
Exactly, a lot of unexpected things. So that's pretty much. I mean, that's a really extreme example, but that kind of example is when I go to these meetings or I go meet another circumnavigator. I learn these amazing stories and find information about places that I've never been. That from talking to them, it really piques my interest and really wants me to go travel to these places.
Right, and I'm also looking forward to that. Is it a lunch like usually done every year, especially before the pandemic in New York? Is it a lunch or dinner? Like
It's a dinner. It's
it,
a black
it's a black tie dinner. I was looking forward to that, but then the pandemic came. But I think that's one of the coolest things that this club is doing.
And I think it's great too. And they have amazing people that participate at these events. So for this, and they're still working through the logistics, but right before the pandemic, they had scheduled Ken Burns to come out, and he was going to be the keynote speaker. They've had John Glenn, the astronaut. They've had Neil Armstrong there. They've had former presidents of the United States, and it's the pedigree of this club, which is one of the things that I really, really love, is also amazing. I mean, the club was founded in the early 1900s, I think 1902. And, some of the early people that founded this club or part of this club were like Williams Jennings Bryan, who ran for president of the United States a number of times. Most people have heard of him because of the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee, where they were where the trial was are you allowed to teach evolution versus creationism in the United States, which at the time was a big topic of discussion. But he was a member of the club, and he submitted a whale tooth to the
Is this the same that we're using right now?
It is. It's
meetings?
The same one.
Wow,
yes, it's the same one. It's a whale tooth that he got, I believe, from South America, and he's presented for the club. But you have Harry Houdini, was a member, the magician. He was a member of the club for many years. Hubert Hoover, who was the president of the United States, he was a member of the club. John Philip Sousa, who was he wrote many of the famous marches in the early 1900s. Again, you just have all these really amazing pedigree of history, and not just from the United States. There's people from all over the world who have been members and who are members who have done just amazing travels.
Actually, I was just reading the log again this morning before this interview, and that's where I discovered that Ken Burns is actually a real person. I really didn't know that before because I always see his name on Movie Maker or iMovie on
Right.
Macintosh, right? So I thought it's like, okay, Ken Burns, I have to click this one, but I didn't know that it's actually a real person, and I just found out that he was inducted to the Magellan, what do you call that thing, Magellan something,
Yeah, the Order of the Magellan.
the Order of the Magellan of the Circumnavigators Club. And actually, the first time I came across your name was when I received this log year 2019 when you won the
Oh,
photography
that's
contest
right.
of the log, and that's where I came across your name for the first time because you got a first prize, and it's an amazing photo. Yeah, the Bhutan archer, this one. it's
Yes.
it's an amazing photo, and I just found out that you've published a book this year, which is called the Himalaya Memories,
Correct.
right? So wow, you're also into photography, and I think that's an amazing picture, and you've spent a lot of time in the Himalayas. So can you tell us more about your experience in the Himalayas? Because that is one of my dream destinations. I really wanted to be there, whether that be in Nepal, Bhutan, or Tibet. In fact, I almost booked a trip to Tibet when I was living in China because my dream is to be at the Everest base camp because there are two sides. One is in Tibet and in Nepal. So I almost went to Tibet, but there something happened, so wasn't able to do it. But it's still my dream, and you were able to really actually do it. And you went into the other side, which is the Nepal side of the Everest base camp, which is I think more difficult because you need to hike. And
Correct. That's it. That's exactly right. The Tibetan side, I've been told, you can almost drive to it.
get right to it. Although it's difficult because of the elevation, but you don't need to
Right.
hike. But what you did was you hike, and tell us more about that experience and why are you so fascinated about the Himalayas and you even publish a book about it.
Well, it's same as you. I've wanted to go there for many decades, and I finally hooked up with a friend of mine who lives in New York, and we were talking about going to the Himalayas, and we set a date, and we said we're doing it. Let's go. And so once we set it, we pretty much just focused on how do we make that happen. And so our trip was about three plus weeks in Nepal, and so we flew to Kathmandu, and we spent a couple of days in one of the little local suburb areas called Bhaktapur. And just so happened while we were there's a festival, I believe it's a Hindu festival called Diwali, and it's very popular in India and Southeast Asia and there, and as well as in Nepal. And um, it was wild. There was drums all night and people dancing and music and fires and animal sacrifices. And for a Westerner not used to all that, it was pretty it was very overwhelming, but it was also amazing. And so anyway, so we spent 3 days in Bhaktapur and experienced that, and then we flew to Lukla. And Lukla is a town at roughly it's roughly 9,000 feet. So I believe that's roughly around 3,000 meters or so. And that's where you start your trek. And to get to Mount Everest Base Camp, which is the trek I went on, it's around 8 to 10 days to
Oh
get there.
man, that's tough.
And
That's tough.
it's like I don't know the kilometer translation, but it's an 80-mile round trip So it's again, it's probably 140 kilometers or so, but it's a it's a pretty intense trip. In fact, I've done a lot of hiking around the world. I lived in Colorado for a lot of time, where I was able to do a lot of high elevation hiking there. But my 13, 14 day trek to Mount Everest Base Camp and back was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And what made it so difficult, besides the fact there is no mechanized transportation there. You are walking. You're either walking or you're on a horse. And in fact, all the stuff they carry, all the goods, beer and food, and they carry it up there. There's Sherpas with stuff like behind attached to their head as they hike up the mountains. And these people, they like bounce up the mountain like gazelles. It's amazing to watch. But anyway, so we hiked and trekked up to there, and we stay in tea houses. That used to be you'd stay in tents, but those days are over. Now you can stay in these tea houses, which are essentially like some of them are very nice hotels. Some of them are like wood, like there's a plywood floor and a plywood wall and no window. So some of it is pretty scarce. And then once you get around 4,000 meters or so, which I think is around 14,000 feet, and I don't know what it is about that mark, but once you get over there, the quality of the food deteriorates very quickly. You're eating a lot of carbohydrates, so a lot of rice. You can get some eggs, but they're not exactly plentiful. In fact, I had someone tell me, they said, look, if you don't see the chickens, don't eat the eggs. A lot of the heat that is coming into these rooms are from yak chips, and that have been dried, and they're flat and they've been dried, and they're dipped in kerosene, which is a carcinogen, and then they put them in these like stoves and they light them up, and you have black smoke in these rooms, and everyone's crowded around this little stove for heat, and you're like, God, am I going to get cancer by breathing this stuff in? And then of course there's the altitude, and a number of us took Diamox, which is a medicine which helps fake your body out to deal with the altitude. But of the there were six of us. We had six Sherpas and two guides as part of our team, and three of the six of us got some sort of altitude sickness. Fortunately, I did not. I made it there and made it back. Although I lost a lot of weight. I lost probably 15 pounds, which for me, I mean, I'm a bigger guy than I was then, but I'm not a big guy. So losing 15 pounds is a lot of weight. And of course, that was fun. When I got back to Singapore, I was living in Singapore. When I got back to Singapore, I was like, great, I can have as many Frappuccinos as I want from Starbucks. But anyway, on the way back, there was three of the six of us that were really hurting. I mean, a lot slower on the way down, not sleeping well, headaches. So they all encountered some form of altitude sickness. And on the last day, one of the people we were with, she was in such bad shape, we had to charter a horse for her to get her out. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go down this nice trail for an hour. It was 8 hours on a horse doing elevation up, elevation down, up, down in very, very rugged terrain. So it wasn't exactly this easy ride to get this person back to Lukla, and then getting her into some sort of care in Kathmandu, which wasn't very top notch, and then we had to get her out of the country to a more Western style hospital for her to get proper care. But I mean, it got pretty dicey towards the end.
Yeah. That's what I thought, because going there is not easy, and I've read some people even died even just going to the Everest base camp because of the altitude, because of the
Yes.
complications of it. So when I saw your your post that you're able to do it, I was like, wow, this is really a huge accomplishment, especially hiking. And Lukla, I heard, is one of the scariest airports in the world, man. It's like, whoa, that's one of my hesitation in doing that Everest base camp on that Nepal side because of that airport. I think I'm really scared landing on that airport.
Well, the people that are landing there, the pilots, they're very, very good at it. In fact, if for those of you that are listening, if you're not sure what we're talking about, go on YouTube and do a search on Lukla Airport landing. And there's a lot of videos. In fact, I posted one on my YouTube channel, but that I took of the landing. But it's a fun thing to watch. It's pretty sketchy, but the people there that are flying those planes, they're pretty good at it. That's the least of your worries on that trip.
And you're also into photography, so what made you fascinated in into photography?
Well, I think again, I was very fortunate growing up when I was very, very young, like 12, 13. A friend of my father's presented me with a camera and a couple of lenses, and back then it was 35 millimeter film, for me to experiment and see if this was something that I enjoyed. And it was a hobby that I really loved. And fortunately, it was something that people liked the photographs I used to take. And so I got that positive affirmation that I didn't think I was any good, but other people thought I was good. So hey, go with it. And so anyway, and it really allowed me to capture a lot of the beauty of travel. I mean, I think, in fact, I think that's what we see today in the popularity and sites like Instagram and Facebook is all these pictures with, because everyone's got a really a great camera. Anyone who's got a smartphone has got a great camera at their availability, so they can take pictures of anything they want. And there's a lot of great pictures that are coming out there in the world. And I think it's that fascination that I had back in the old days, shooting 35 millimeter film, going to these places around the world that you come back with really great memories. But at the end of the day, it's the pictures that really hold you to the story of your adventure and your travels. In fact, if you go on my website, Puldy.com, where I display a small fraction of my photographs, there's something in there called classics.
Yeah, I
And
saw that
those are
one.
yeah, so those are
Amazing.
35 millimeter photographs that I took in the 80s. And there's a number of pictures there from my trip to Europe, that first trip to Europe. And you can see in there, for example, the pictures of in the old city of Jerusalem. You can see the Dome of the Rock, and you can see all these TV antennas all over the place. And there's a picture that I took of I was in Tulum in Mexico, and Tulum is an old Mayan ruin. And I took a picture with a couple of my friends. Well, I hadn't thought of those people in years. And what's really interesting about that photograph is if you go to Tulum today, it is so developed, you couldn't duplicate that photograph.
Yeah, I saw those photos on your website, and it's really amazing, especially looking at the colors. And I think you can really see the difference between film and digital. And I'm really just drawn towards film, especially the end result of it, like the color combination. It reminded me of Steve McCurry's Kodachrome days.
Yes.
The color is just very hard to emulate nowadays with digital. And looking at your photos on your website, I was like, whoa. And you were using a 35 which is a classic like favorite of travel photographers. And I heard you're using Leica nowadays as well, which is a very a very wonderful camera. So I think that's really amazing. You're combining traveling and photography, producing these wonderful images.
Yeah, thank you. It is quite amazing. In fact, going back to the website, one of the photographs on there, which is one of my personal favorites, it's a picture of a hieroglyphics, and it's taken inside a tomb in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, near Luxor, Egypt, across the Nile. And this picture, which was shot on 35 millimeter, it's inside a tomb. I don't remember which one. And the way I shot it, because you couldn't use flash or artificial lights inside these tombs, the guide stood at the entrance with a mirror and reflected the light of the sun onto that wall. And then I shot the picture on the wall without any flash photography. And you look at the colors, the inks that they use to paint those hieroglyphics, and those hieroglyphics are thousands of years old. It just amazes me how beautiful those antiquities have been preserved.
Right. What camera were you using that time?
That camera was a Minolta. I can't remember the model number, but it was a Minolta 35 millimeter, and I had a 35 millimeter lens on it.
Wow, amazing. And during the, I'm not familiar with those cameras, but do you also need to adjust like the ISO equivalent, probably called ASA during the time, right? Film days.
Exactly.
Do you have to
Yeah,
adjust
you
that
have
one as
to
well?
you yeah you have to adjust everything, and that's one of the things that, I mean, I'm old school. I mean, even though it's nice to go automatic and use whatever they tell you, um, I like being able to adjust, what's the ISO rating of this particular shot? What's the speed that I want to shoot the picture? What's the f-stop or the aperture of the lens? So I can get the depth of field that, that's appropriate. Meaning, do I want to have the background fuzzy? Do I want to have it clear? How much of the foreground is clear? And so there's a lot of mechanics in science in taking a photograph versus just point and shoot. But hey, there's a lot of moments where point and shoot is really good.
Yeah, especially for composition, you don't have to think a lot of things, just point and shoot. And yeah, you've mentioned that you're old school, you like this stuff, very manual, analog, but then you're using Leica, and Leica is known for, it's, even though it's digital, they kind of stick to that analog feel, of the, it's very mechanical as well. So I think you have a great camera, even though you're shooting digital nowadays.
Yeah, in fact, I want to talk cameras for a couple of minutes. When I went to Nepal and Bhutan, I wanted I actually, before I left the United States to go on my adventure in Asia, I actually walked into a camera store in Seattle, and I always thought that Leica cameras they're very expensive. Their quality is great, but they're also very expensive. And I always thought they were some things I could not afford. But I walked into the Seattle camera store, and they had a Leica camera. It was a compact camera called a Leica Deluxe 5. And it probably was, no bigger than an iPhone 12. I mean, it was thicker, but roughly that size, and I something I could slide in my pocket, and it was a 10 megapixel camera, which at the time in 2012, that was actually a pretty
Yeah.
decent camera. And so I it was affordable, and they made me a great deal at the camera store in Seattle, so I bought it. And I shot with that camera almost everywhere I went. In fact, in my book Himalaya Memories, almost all my pictures were shot with that Leica Deluxe 5. In fact, that picture that you mentioned, the Bhutan Archer, which people can also see on my website, that was shot with with this Leica Deluxe 5 small compact camera, which it was just amazing the quality of photographs I was able to glean from that camera.
Amazing, amazing German technology. And you're also into Porsche cars. So it's one of my favorite cars. And you do it as a hobby. You drive Porsches and you go to Germany. Wow, I think it's an amazing hobby, especially Porsche German technology.
It was it's something that, again, something that I've worked very hard for. And when I actually when I moved to California, the Porsche that we're talking about is a Porsche 356. And so I have a 1963 Porsche 356. So the car is almost as old as I am. And this particular car, I in California, there's actually a lot of them here. It's one of at the time it was the largest Porsche market in the world for these cars. And so there's a lot of them out here. And so when I moved here, I realized I could get one. So I joined a club, and this is something I recommend to anyone who's looking at a car. like especially an older car. If you don't know much about these vehicles, it's not like buying a used car like you would buy a normal used car. I mean, there's a lot of specifics and particular nuances of these older vehicles that you really just don't know about unless you do a lot of research. And the best way to do research is to go meet people who are part of these car clubs. And pretty much any car that you're looking for, there's probably a car club for. You know, the Austin Healey Club, the Jaguar XKE E-type clubs, the Ford Thunderbird Club. You know, there's a club for every car. And so anyway, so I found in Southern California the Porsche, the 356 Club of Southern California. And so I joined that club and I joined the board. I'm actually the president of that club right now. And
Wow.
I learned about these cars, and I met people who told me what was a good car to buy and what cars to stay away from. And they got me hooked on with this really fantastic car that I've had now for about 4 years. And I've driven that car all over the United States. One of my favorite things, not favorite, one of my goals was to drive cross country from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And so I was able to take my Porsche 356, and I actually had it transported to Jacksonville, Florida, where I'm originally from, and spent some time with my father. And then I hopped in the car and I drove it across the country, 3,000 miles in 9 days.
Wow. When did you do this?
I did this right at the beginning of the pandemic in the United States. So I did it the March of 2020.
Because I've
So
read an article on the log. Were you the one who? I read
yes,
this
exactly.
article. Oh wow, that's
That was
when I was reading that
yes.
article in the log magazine. I was like, whoa, this is one of my dream trips to actually do a road trip, a long drive using a classic car, whatever car, as long as it's classic. I was thinking before Volkswagen Beetle because that's
Oh yeah.
more affordable. Like Porsche is expensive, but that was my dream. And when I saw that article in the log, and I was like, "Whoa, this man is living the dream, man!" And it's even better because he's driving a classic Porsche. And you've mentioned there that one of the challenges is because you're driving an old car, you have this at the back of your mind that it might break, and it's just a matter of time because it's old. But then you're able to pull it off, and I think it's one of the most amazing trips that you can do. I didn't know it was you. That's crazy.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that was it. Just as you described. I mean, it's something I've always wanted to have, this long cross country solo trip in an old classic car, and I was very fortunate that all the moon and stars aligned for me to take this trip. And then of course the pandemic. So with each day, there was a little bit, I felt like the screws were just tightening a little bit more. Was the hotel going to be open? Was I going to be able to find a restaurant or a gas station open? Were they going to close the border at the state of California state line so I wouldn't be able to get home? I mean, all these things go through your head as this all this craziness was unfolding in the United States. But on the flip side, I'd be in New Orleans and at a restaurant that would be packed with people, and then I was in this little artist town in Texas called Marfa, Texas, and the Marfa, Texas, the town's claim to fame. There's actually a couple, but one of them is they filmed the movie Giant there with Rock Hudson and James Dean and I'm forgetting the there was one other famous star in that, but anyway, it's this amazing this amazing artist town, and they're all partying like Corona beers with a little sticky that says virus on it. Here's the coronavirus.
Yeah, I think that's ultimate freedom, and I think the best way to do it is to drive solo. Like, it's gonna be a different experience. Okay, you're in a new town driving, and then you have to look for a hotel, spend the night at a hotel or a motel, and then resume your travel the next day. I think that's ultimate freedom, and I really wanted to do it.
It was fabulous, but also as you described, I mean, in the back of your head, it's every time you get in the car, is it going to
Yeah.
start? Is something going to fail? I mean, there's no real oil temperature gauge on these cars. It's just like a needle, and you don't know how accurate it is. So every time I stop for gas, I'm taking a dipstick with a temperature gauge on it, and I'm sticking it in
Whoa.
the engine to see how hot the car is.
But it's air cooled, right? Because it's a Porsche,
Correct.
so it's air
Right.
cooled. Wow.
Right.
So you don't have to put water. You don't have to worry about water. Wow, amazing. This next part of the podcast episode has sensitive subject matter regarding suicide. If you're in a crisis or you think you may have an emergency, call your doctor immediately. If you're having suicidal thoughts, talk to a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area. And I just have to switch a little bit here because I've listened to your podcast in one of the podcasts on the internet. You've talked about suicide, and I was listening to it and looking at these people who travel a lot. I see you as living the dream, living your life, going to amazing places, having these resources. But then at the same time, life is not perfect, man. You've struggled with this mental health issue about depression and things that we cannot control. So you've talked about how you're able to go through this terrible time of your life. So can you please share this a little bit to our listeners, because especially nowadays a lot of people are suffering from mental health issue because of the pandemic.
Yeah. So let me add some context to the conversation. So in 2009, my first wife, she took her life uh, for suicide, and that experience was devastating. And in fact, the word devastating isn't deep enough. It doesn't describe the pain and the anguish that you go through when you lose a loved one in that way. Um, and from that experience, even though I had experienced mental depression in personally in my life, it wasn't to the point that I was willing to take my life. So it never got that bad for me. But it was something that I was familiar with. But again, when my first wife took her life, I mean that just set it on a completely new level. And I was suddenly a single father, raising three boys, of which my oldest was a freshman in college, maybe, yeah, I think he was a freshman in college, and my youngest was a freshman in high school. So it was, you lose a spouse in such a dramatic way. You still have the responsibility of being a parent, and you still have to, earn a living. So you have all these things going on at the same time. So, it's taken me years to really rebuild my life to such a point that I could have these types of experiences, that we've been describing here, where you're not going to be doing this, living this kind of lifestyle, doing these things if you have some mental health issue going on in the background. It just distracts you. It takes your focus away. Um, there's a cloudiness going on. So where I've spent a lot of my time since my wife died in 2009 is I've spent a lot of time working with other people who are survivors of suicide, meaning that they have lost a loved one to suicide. And I'm always happy to talk about my journey. My journey is my journey. It's not, everyone goes through their own experiences, and this is something that people need to understand. If they lose a loved one to suicide, and I can certainly tell people what I did and how I responded, and the things I did that were very positive and the things I did that weren't so positive. Everyone does it their own way, and so it's kind of like by talking to people, there's you learn things to help you through your journey, and you also, it gives you the confidence to know that you're not the only person going through this. um, and so, in addition to helping people on my own, I've also spent some time in Los Angeles working with Dee Hirsch Mental Health Services, where they work with survivors. They also help do a lot with suicide prevention. Um, they are a nationally recognized organization in the fight against suicide and helping people who have lost a loved one through suicide. And so I work with them and volunteer probably about 16 to 24 weeks a year, working with other suicide survivors like myself. And I usually meet people where they've either just lost a loved one, may have been within a few months, to people that have lost someone maybe even a few years ago, and they're still struggling with how to get through it. And for me personally, um, even though the first year was extremely hard, I'll have to say it probably was 5 years, 6 years before I felt that I was in much closer to the person I was before my loss. So it's not something that you recover quickly, and it's something that you never forget. And quite frankly, I'll say that it changes you forever. You never ever will be the same person you were after that experience.
Yeah, first of all, sorry about that. And thank you for sharing your journey. I remember on the podcast you've mentioned that some people might think that you need to really get over this one, but you've mentioned that once this happens, it's going to be with you forever. It's not going to go away, but the thing is, you just need to live with it.
Yeah, it's part of your life. Your DNA. I tell people, I mean, think of it this way: your DNA has evolved. You know, the your body has now changed into a new form, and your mind has changed, and you have to kind of figure out a way to work through that change.
Since you love traveling, did you also use travel as a coping mechanism during those trying times?
Yes, the short answer is I absolutely did use travel as a coping mechanism for me. I think the change was very valuable to me, in terms of getting me into a new environment and forcing me to move forward and make decisions, versus sitting at home where you're doing the same thing. It's not requiring you to push yourself. So travel for me was absolutely part of my therapy. Um, I think overall it was great. I mean, it like I said, it helped me. It allowed me to meet new people. It allowed me to experience new adventures. It allowed me to really push my mind out of that, spin loop of sadness and grief. And even though I was still sad and grieving, but because I was traveling, it forced me to kind of move into a direction. I don't know if forward is the right word, but it forced me to move, and it forced me to think, and it forced me to recognize that there is a life out there, and there are exciting things that can still happen to you. And I think this is one of the points that I made in that Hope Out of Darkness podcast that you were mentioning, is that um, you, even though you've lost a loved one, you're still alive. You have to live your life, and you can't let yourself get dragged down into that depression, that ultimately took the life of your loved one, because it can happen. It's very easily could happen. I mean, I felt myself going there many times in those early months.
It's interesting that you've mentioned traveling as a coping mechanism or moving sort of way, because I've also read before or listened to a podcast where one of these famous boxer, Tyson Fury, was so depressed that he ended up attempting suicide a lot of times, and he said that those thoughts come into his mind whenever he's alone and not doing anything. So he needs to work out, he needs to move, and I think that that's one of the important points that we can take there, that moving is essential during these trying times as well.
And again, I think the important thing is that that's what worked for me. um, I'm not suggesting that's going to work for everyone, but it certainly is something that was very helpful for me, and that it's something should people think about. I think really the most important thing that really did help me, that I encourage everyone to do, that is suffering some form of mental illness, or maybe has lost someone to suicide, is go seek a trained therapist or grief counselor who is a professional, and is someone that really can be your guide and can advise you in terms of what you're trying to do or what you're thinking of doing, and can help you really think through that. Because you may be like, well, I'm just going to go to Antarctica, and maybe it's not the right place for you to go to recover from such a tragic loss. Maybe if you want to travel, go downtown and have a staycation for a couple of days and test that out first. But the point is have someone who's a trained authority, who understands, who's had lots of experience, who's with how recoveries are possible, and can really act in your best interest as an independent sounding board before you do something that unfortunately you may regret later.
Thank you once again for sharing that one, Michael, sharing your journey to others. And yeah, I know Antarctica is one of your bucket lists now. You want to complete the seven continents.
Yes, I'm now in a good part. I'm now in a good part of my life that Antarctica is a good place
Is
to go.
yeah, great, great. That's good to know. Thank you for being on the podcast. So before we end, do you have any final message to our listeners regarding travel, especially for those who dream of traveling the world like what you did?
Well, I think travel is absolutely one of the really great equalizers, meaning that for people who travel, they get an experience and an exposure to the world that they are never going to get by sitting at home. And they recognize that, really, even though I think it's a little cliche, I think it's also very true that that you meet a lot of people around the world that are very similar to where you are. They may not look like you, and they may not eat the same foods, and they may not have grown up in the same type of house or went to the same type of school, but inside there's a lot of common traits and common virtues that we all share across the planet. And once you travel and experience it, it's very eye-opening to what's going on in this world. So I encourage you to think big and dream big. And of course, if you're interested in seeing some of the pictures that we talked about here, I mean, please go to my website, puldy.com. It's puldy.com, and there's a contact form on there. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thank you once again for being here. Appreciate it so much. And before we end, I'm gonna just read this quote. And then there is the most dangerous risk of all, the risk of spending your life not doing what you want on the bet you can buy yourself the freedom to do it later. From Randy Commissar. Thank you guys for tuning in. This has been your host, Regin. Till the next episode.